The galaxy's most feared warriors were about to meet their match, and it wasn't who they expected. Lucas stood on the edge of the training field, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the looming shadow of the Deathworlder standing across from him. For a moment, he felt like a child in the presence of giants. These were the warriors the galaxy feared, the soldiers who had crushed empires with their bare hands. And here he was, a human, the weakest species in the galaxy, tasked with outsmarting them. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Humans had never been considered a threat to anyone, let alone the ruthless warriors from distant planets. The Deathworlders were the galaxy's finest, and for good reason. They were fierce, brutal, and their combat skills were unmatched by any species. But Lucas wasn't here to fit the mold, he wasn't here to be another nameless soldier lost in a galaxy filled with powerful aliens. He was here to prove that humanity had something no one else did. He had spent years training for this moment, battling his own doubts and insecurities. As the distant hum of the training facility surrounded him, Lucas couldn't help but wonder if he truly belonged here. Was he just another human, an insignificant cog in the machine, or could he do something that no one, not even the Deathworlders, had ever seen before? The Deathworlder before him, a towering figure with eyes like molten lava, sneered at him, his muscles rippling beneath his combat suit. "This will be quick, human," the Deathworlder growled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You might want to start running." Lucas didn't flinch. He wasn't here to run. He was here to survive. With a sudden roar, the Deathworlder charged, his fists swinging like boulders. Lucas felt the air shift as the warrior moved faster than he could track. It was like watching a storm come to life, violent, unstoppable. He had less than a second to react, but Lucas had trained for this. He knew what to do. As the Deathworlder's fist came crashing toward him, Lucas dropped to the ground, narrowly avoiding the blow. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. It wasn't about speed or strength, it was about understanding. Every movement, every tactic the Deathworlder used was predictable. And Lucas had spent countless hours studying these tactics, anticipating them before they ever happened. The Deathworlder was already preparing for his next move, but Lucas was faster. As the warrior lifted his leg to deliver a crushing kick, Lucas slid beneath him and tripped him up, sending the massive warrior crashing to the ground. For a moment, there was silence. The Deathworlder lay stunned, his breath coming in heavy gasps. Lucas didn't wait for him to recover. He moved quickly, using his opponent's momentum against him, flipping the Deathworlder onto his back and pinning him down with an unexpected maneuver. Lucas's heart raced, but his body was steady, every move precise, every muscle trained to act without hesitation. The audience, mostly other soldiers and commanders from across the galaxy, watched in stunned silence. They had never seen anything like this before. The Deathworlder had been defeated, not by brute strength, but by strategy, by an understanding of the game. And it was a human who had done it. For the first time in a long while, Lucas didn't feel like the weak link. He had won, against all odds. And in that moment, something deep inside him clicked. Maybe humanity wasn't as weak as the galaxy thought. The Deathworlder slowly sat up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath, the disbelief evident in his voice. "No human has ever done that before." Lucas stood, offering a hand to the warrior. "Maybe it's time to change that." The room was dead silent for a long moment, before the murmurs began. Shocked gasps, excited whispers. Some were filled with disbelief, others with awe. But there was no denying it, Lucas had just done what no one thought possible. The weakest species in the galaxy had just outsmarted one of the most dangerous creatures to ever walk the stars. With that victory, Lucas's life changed forever. But this was just the beginning. What came next would push him to the edge of everything he thought he knew about himself and the galaxy. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain, Lucas would never be seen as weak again. The dust in the training arena had barely settled, but the galaxy's perception of humanity had already begun to shift. Lucas stood at the center of the field, still catching his breath. The Deathworlder, though bruised and humiliated, was slowly getting to his feet. The silence in the arena was deafening, the disbelief thick in the air. In the stands, eyes from every corner of the galaxy were fixed on Lucas, some filled with admiration, others with suspicion. They had witnessed something extraordinary, but it was hard to know if it was a fluke or the start of something far more dangerous. The Deathworlder glared at Lucas, his expression one of grudging respect. "You've done the impossible," he said, voice still rough from the impact. "But don't think this changes anything. You've only shown one of us can be beaten. The rest of us," he trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. There were thousands more like him. But Lucas didn't flinch. "Don't worry," Lucas replied, his voice steady. "I know this isn't over." As the audience began to disperse, murmurs of "human victory" began to ripple through the crowd. Some were cheering, others were skeptical. For the first time in galactic history, the galaxy's most powerful species were looking at humans differently, no longer as weak, but as unpredictable. And that uncertainty was both a weapon and a threat. But Lucas knew better than to let the victory cloud his judgment. He had won a battle, but not the war. The Deathworlder had been only one opponent, and there were many more waiting in the shadows. What he'd done today was a glimpse of human potential, but it wasn't enough to make the galaxy fear humanity. Not yet. Later that night, Lucas sat in his small quarters, staring at the stars outside the window. His mind was racing, the weight of what had just happened settling in. He'd taken down a Deathworlder, but what did that really mean in the grand scheme of things? Could humans really stand up to the galaxy's might? Could he? Suddenly, a voice crackled through his comm system, snapping him from his thoughts. "Lucas, it's Commander Valora." "Go ahead," Lucas responded, already bracing himself. "We need you in the briefing room. The higher-ups want to talk to you." The commander's tone was serious, and Lucas could feel the tension in her voice. He stood up, his muscles sore but his mind sharp. This wasn't just a casual conversation, it was about what came next. And Lucas knew that whatever the higher-ups had planned, it wasn't going to be easy. When Lucas arrived at the briefing room, he was met by a group of officers, all with stern faces. At the center of the room stood a tall man in a dark uniform, his expression cold and calculating. "Lucas," the man began, his voice smooth, "I am General Zalin. You've made quite an impression today." "Thank you, sir," Lucas replied, but his voice didn't betray his nerves. He was used to this by now. "You've shown us that humanity has potential," General Zalin continued. "But what you did in that arena today, it's not enough. Not by a long shot." The weight of his words hung in the air. Lucas had expected the praise, but not the challenge. He had proven his worth, now the real battle was about to begin. "Humanity has to prove itself," Zalin said, his gaze intense. "We've been watching you for a while now, Lucas. Your performance, your tactics, your strategies. You're the first human we've seen capable of fighting on this level. But we need more." Lucas tilted his head, sensing where this was going. "More? Much more," Zalin replied. "You'll need to lead a team. A team of humans who will face the galaxy's deadliest warriors. We'll be sending you to the edge of the galaxy, into the unknown." There was a pause, and Lucas could feel the room's temperature drop. This wasn't just about one-on-one combat anymore. This was something bigger. "The Deathworlders will be watching," Zalin continued, "and we need you to show them that humanity can stand toe-to-toe with anyone. This isn't just a test for you. It's a test for all of us." Lucas's heart began to race. He had thought he understood what was at stake, but this was different. Now, the entire fate of humanity's place in the galaxy rested on his shoulders. As Zalin continued to speak, outlining the mission ahead, Lucas's mind was already working overtime. The stakes were higher than ever before. They were going into the unknown, where danger waited at every turn. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, but that could change in an instant. Lucas had proven his strength. Now, he would prove that humanity's true strength was far more than what anyone could imagine. The days following the briefing felt like a blur. Lucas's mind was a constant whirlwind of calculations and preparation. The mission ahead was nothing like anything he'd ever encountered before. The Deathworlders weren't just the strongest species, they were tactical geniuses, warriors who had fought in countless battles across the galaxy. The team he'd been assigned to lead was inexperienced, to say the least, and he knew that their survival would depend on how well he could prepare them. As the weeks passed, Lucas trained relentlessly. He pushed himself and his team harder than anyone thought possible. Every hour was spent perfecting combat techniques, survival skills, and tactics. But even with all his effort, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had faced a Deathworlder one-on-one and won, but leading an entire team was an entirely different beast. He could teach them everything he knew, but in the end, it would be their will to survive that would carry them through. The team was a mixed bag. There was Elias, a quick-witted young man who had only recently joined the ranks, with little combat experience but a sharp mind. Maya, a seasoned pilot, had experience with navigating hostile environments but had never been in direct combat. Then there was Richard, an older soldier with years of field experience, though his body was starting to show signs of age. And finally, Layla, a medic who had been trained for emergency situations but had never seen true warfare. Lucas knew that with this crew, they would either fall apart under pressure or come together in ways they never imagined. And that was the first lesson he had to teach them: they had to trust each other, or they wouldn't survive. The first stop on their mission was a desolate planet on the outskirts of the galaxy. A planet known only as Vicaris. It had been abandoned by most civilizations due to the harsh conditions, but Lucas and his team would have to make it their home base. Here, they would train in actual combat scenarios, each designed to push them to their limits. As they landed, Lucas took in the barren landscape. There was something eerie about the planet, a feeling that lingered in the air. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cracked surface. There was no sign of life. It was the perfect environment to simulate what lay ahead, an unforgiving battleground. "All right, team," Lucas said, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't going to be easy, but we're in this together. We'll adapt. We'll learn. And we'll win. No one's leaving here until we're ready for what's out there." He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but there was something else too: determination. They had been chosen for this mission because they were among the best humanity had to offer. They were the first true test of humanity's ability to survive against the galaxy's deadliest. And Lucas would be damned if they failed. Over the next few days, the team engaged in grueling exercises. They practiced tactical maneuvers in the harsh terrain, learned how to set up makeshift defenses, and familiarized themselves with the latest weaponry. But as the days wore on, something strange began to happen. They started to bond. It wasn't just the sweat and blood that forged their connection, it was the shared moments of vulnerability, the quiet talks around the campfire when the weight of the mission felt too heavy to bear. Lucas could see it in their eyes: they were no longer just a team of soldiers. They were a family, bound by a common purpose. They began to trust one another, to rely on each other in ways that went beyond combat. They shared stories from their pasts, laughed at each other's mistakes, and gave each other strength when they thought they had nothing left. But Lucas knew it wouldn't be enough to simply bond. In the days ahead, they would face challenges unlike anything they had ever encountered. He had pushed them hard, and it was beginning to take a toll on some of them. The physical strain was obvious, but it was the emotional strain that worried him more. As much as they had come to rely on one another, the pressure was building, the weight of knowing that they were preparing to face an enemy who would not show mercy. On the 6th day, Lucas called them together for one final training exercise. They would face a simulation of what they might encounter during their mission, a mock battle against a team of Deathworlders. The simulation was as close to the real thing as they could get without actually going to war. The stakes were high. It was their chance to test everything they had learned in the last few weeks. "Today, you'll face your worst nightmare," Lucas said, his eyes locking with each member of his team. "I've seen the Deathworlders in action. They will use everything against you, your fear, your doubts, your exhaustion. Don't let them win. Stay focused. Stay united." As the exercise began, Lucas watched his team closely. The initial minutes were rough. They hesitated, unsure of themselves, trying to find their rhythm. But slowly, something began to click. Elias's sharp thinking was starting to pay off, guiding them through the chaos. Maya's piloting skills helped them maneuver through difficult situations. Richard's experience kept them grounded, making the tough calls when necessary. Layla's calm under pressure kept them alive when injuries were sustained. And Lucas? He was the glue that held them together, constantly strategizing, making decisions that would save lives. It wasn't perfect, they lost ground, they faltered, but by the end of the exercise, they were no longer a ragtag group of individuals. They were a team, and that made all the difference. But as the simulation ended, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't quite ready. The Deathworlders might have been too much for them. He had seen the strength they had as a unit, but that wouldn't be enough when faced with true combat. He had one more lesson to teach them, to never underestimate the enemy, no matter how strong they thought they were. The time had come. Lucas and his team stood at the edge of the landing platform, staring out at the vast expanse of the unknown. The planet they had just arrived on, Zeta 9, was a hostile, unforgiving environment, a perfect test of their newfound skills. The mission was clear: to infiltrate an enemy base, extract crucial intelligence, and return without leaving a trace. But in the pit of Lucas's stomach, he knew it wasn't that simple. They weren't just here for a quick operation, they were about to face the Deathworlders for the first time. There was no more training, no more simulations. This was real. The team stood together, their faces tense but resolute. Maya's hands gripped the controls of their shuttle, while Elias, Richard, and Layla made final checks on their gear. Lucas gave them one last glance. "You've trained for this moment," he said quietly. "No matter what happens, stay focused, stay together. We're here for each other." Maya nodded and punched in the coordinates. The shuttle roared to life, and the small group was soon hurtling toward Zeta 9's surface. The planet was shrouded in thick clouds, the atmosphere nearly impenetrable. The landing zone was a forest of jagged black rock, each stone sharp and dangerous. As they touched down, Lucas felt his heart race. He could feel the weight of their mission, but more than that, he felt the fear that was creeping in, fear that the Deathworlders would outmatch them in ways they couldn't anticipate. They disembarked quickly, securing their perimeter. The base they had come to infiltrate was several kilometers away, hidden in the heart of a mountain range. It wasn't just the base that concerned them, it was the unknowns lurking between them and their goal. The Deathworlders had long since made Zeta 9 their home, and their presence here was the ultimate test of humanity's strength and resilience. The team moved quietly, keeping low and alert as they navigated through the rough terrain. Lucas led the way, his every instinct on edge. Each snap of a twig, each rustle of the wind made him jump. The planet was alive in a way that felt unsettling, as though the world itself was aware of their presence and waiting to strike. After hours of tense travel, they finally arrived at the base. It was a massive compound, heavily fortified, with advanced security systems in place. Lucas and his team huddled behind a ridge to formulate a plan. They had trained for this moment, but the reality was always more daunting. "We'll split into 2 teams," Lucas decided. "Elias, Richard, you'll take the north entrance and disable the main security grid. Maya and Layla, you'll stay with me. We'll go through the west side and set up a diversion. Once the grid's down, we'll meet up inside." There was no room for error. Each movement had to be precise, calculated. No matter how well they had trained, this would be a fight for their lives. As they crept through the shadows toward their respective points of entry, Lucas's thoughts were consumed by one question: would they be ready? Would their training be enough? Suddenly, the silence was broken by a low, eerie growl. Lucas froze. His heart pounded. It was too late to turn back now. They had been detected. The Deathworlders had found them. Without warning, a barrage of gunfire erupted from the shadows, and Lucas's instincts kicked in. He dove to the ground, signaling for the team to spread out. The Deathworlders were fast, faster than anything Lucas had ever seen, and they were closing in on them. The firefight was brutal. Lucas's mind raced as he fired back, his pulse steady despite the chaos. They were outnumbered, but Lucas could see the fear and determination in his team's eyes. They were fighters, every one of them. They had been trained, but now they were being tested in a way that would either break them or forge them into something stronger. "Keep moving," Lucas shouted as he fired another round, taking down a Deathworlder that had flanked their position. Maya and Layla provided cover fire while Lucas and Richard made a dash toward a nearby structure to regroup. Elias's voice crackled through the comms. "The grid's down, but we've got company. Get back here, now." Lucas barked. "Fall back to the rendezvous point." They were running out of time. The Deathworlders had them pinned down, and they had no choice but to retreat to the extraction zone. The battle was a blur of movement, gunfire, and near misses. Every step forward felt like an eternity, but they kept going. They had no choice. It wasn't just about completing the mission anymore. It was about surviving. And in that moment, something inside Lucas clicked. He saw his team working together seamlessly, covering each other's backs in ways that could only come from trust. They weren't just soldiers, they were a family. And that bond made them stronger than any enemy. Finally, they reached the rendezvous point. They had made it. But the victory felt hollow. They had lost 2 of their own. Richard and Elias had taken fatal hits during the firefight. It was a bitter reminder that survival came at a steep cost. As the shuttle lifted off, Lucas glanced back at the planet below. Zeta 9 had been a brutal test. But it had shown them one undeniable truth: they were capable of surviving the impossible. And humanity had only just begun to prove its worth. The ride back to Earth was eerily silent. Lucas stared out of the shuttle window, his mind a haze of confusion, loss, and a burning question: why had they been sent to face such an overwhelming enemy only to lose 2 of their own? The deaths of Richard and Elias weighed heavily on him. He had known this was a dangerous mission, but he had never anticipated that their losses would be so personal, so close to home. Maya sat beside him, her face a mirror of his own turmoil. The team had managed to retrieve the critical intelligence they needed, but at what cost? She looked at Lucas, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think it was worth it?" Lucas didn't respond immediately. He didn't have an answer. What did "worth it" even mean in the context of war? What did it mean when the people you fought alongside were gone, leaving only empty memories and the cold weight of survival? "We've learned a lot," Lucas finally said. "We proved ourselves capable of handling the Deathworlders, but the cost, it's too high." He paused, as if trying to find the right words. "It's not just about the victory, it's about who we lose along the way. And what we become after." Maya nodded, understanding more than Lucas had intended to say. It was a harsh lesson, one they had learned the hard way. But there was no turning back. They were part of something much larger than themselves now. Back on Earth, Lucas and the remaining members of the team were met with a hero's welcome. The mission had been deemed a success by the higher-ups, and the data they had retrieved would revolutionize humanity's approach to intergalactic combat. But to Lucas, it felt hollow. He hadn't won a victory, he had merely survived a brutal trial. The world would never know the true cost of their success. The families of Richard and Elias would never be recognized for the sacrifices they had made. As the days passed, the mission debriefing sessions were long and grueling. They went through every moment of the operation, analyzing their strategy, their execution, and what went wrong. But there was no mention of the loss. There was no time for grieving. The higher-ups were already focused on the next mission. Humanity's survival was on the line, and they couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had been a part of that world, the world of military training, of strategies and calculated risks, but now, he was different. He felt disconnected from everything. The world had moved on, but he couldn't. His mind kept replaying the faces of Richard and Elias, the way they had fought beside him until the end. They weren't just soldiers, they were brothers. And now, they were gone. Maya, who had been one of the strongest voices of reason during their mission, was struggling as well. "We're supposed to be the future," she said, her voice low. "Humanity's last hope. But it feels like we're just being used. No matter what we do, it's never enough." Lucas didn't have an answer for her. They had been sent to prove humanity's strength in the face of the greatest enemy they had ever encountered. But what was the point if they were nothing more than pawns in someone else's game? In the weeks that followed, Lucas began to withdraw from his team. He couldn't bear the thought of losing anyone else. The guilt of their deaths gnawed at him, especially as he watched the higher-ups continue with business as usual. They didn't understand. They didn't know what it felt like to lose your brothers in arms, to feel the weight of their deaths on your conscience every single day. But then, one evening, he received a message that would change everything. It was from Layla, the final member of their team. She had been quiet ever since the mission, too focused on her own grief to say much. But the message she sent him was simple: "I think we can do more." Lucas stared at the message for a long time. It didn't make sense at first. What more could they do? They had already given everything they had, and it had been barely enough. But as the days passed, the words began to take root in his mind. Humanity hadn't just survived against the Deathworlders, they had fought, endured, and conquered in ways that no one had expected. They had proven themselves worthy of standing on the galactic stage. But the true test hadn't been the battle itself, it had been the spirit of the people who fought it. And that was something that couldn't be measured in losses or victories. It was something far deeper. Lucas called a meeting with the surviving members of their team. Maya, Layla, and Lucas sat in silence for a moment before Lucas spoke. "We've lost people," he said quietly. "And it hurts. But the truth is, we can do more. We're not just soldiers. We're humanity's future, and we have to show the galaxy what we're really capable of. We owe it to Richard, Elias, and every person who believed in us." The team looked at him, their faces a mix of grief and determination. Layla nodded slowly. "What do we do?" Lucas smiled faintly. "We keep fighting. We build something better. We teach the galaxy what it means to be human." The days after the meeting were filled with a new sense of purpose. Lucas and the team began to devise a plan, one that wasn't about fighting the Deathworlders or proving their strength in battle. No, this mission would be different. This time, their goal was to shift the balance, to show the galaxy what humanity truly stood for, not just survival, but a spirit of hope, resilience, and unity. The higher-ups had been preoccupied with their next set of tactical operations. They were already moving on, their attention focused on new threats, new enemies. But Lucas and his team knew that something bigger was at play now. Their experience had taught them that the greatest power wasn't in weapons or technology, it was in their ability to inspire. Maya was the first to speak up. We need to gather the right people. Not just soldiers. We need diplomats, leaders, and people who can stand up for humanity in a way that no one else has. If we're going to convince the galaxy that we're more than just another race fighting for survival, we need to show them the strength in our unity. Lucas nodded, his mind already racing. We need to make contact with the most influential groups across the galaxy. Start building a coalition. It's going to be a long shot, but if we succeed, we can turn this whole war around. But there was a catch. It wouldn't be easy. The galaxy was vast and filled with hostile forces, each with their own agendas. The Deathworlders weren't just a threat, they were a force that had driven entire civilizations to the brink of extinction. Convincing others that humanity had something to offer wasn't just a diplomatic mission, it was a battle in itself. Lucas gathered the team for a final briefing. This time, their mission wasn't just about following orders. It was about breaking the mold, about fighting for a future where humans weren't just survivors but leaders. He could see the fire returning to their eyes, the spark of hope that had been missing for so long. The weight of Richard and Elias's deaths still lingered, but now there was a renewed sense of purpose. They were going to make their voices heard. We'll need to reach out to the most influential leaders in the galaxy, Lucas said, outlining the plan. We'll start small, make contact with neutral factions, ones that have stayed out of the war. We'll build trust. Slowly, but surely, we'll show them that humans aren't just a fleeting species. We are the future. Maya raised an eyebrow. And if they don't listen? If they think we're just trying to buy time or gain favor? Lucas's eyes darkened, his voice steady. Then we remind them of what happens when they underestimate us. They knew the risks. If their efforts failed, it could mean the end of humanity's chances in the war. But if they succeeded, they could turn the tide of the conflict. They could reshape the galaxy's perception of humanity forever. Over the next several weeks, Lucas, Maya, Layla, and the rest of the team worked tirelessly. They used the intelligence they had gathered during the mission to identify key neutral factions, sending carefully worded messages, requesting meetings, offering peace and cooperation. They emphasized the need for a united front against the Deathworlders, not just for humanity's survival, but for the galaxy's. At first, it seemed like a long shot. Many of the leaders were skeptical. They had seen humanity's military prowess, yes, but they hadn't seen humanity's heart. The human spirit. What Lucas and his team were offering wasn't just a call for peace, it was a demonstration of everything that made humanity unique, its resilience, its capacity for growth, and its ability to find hope even in the darkest of times. But gradually, the tide began to turn. The first response came from a faction of galactic traitors who had been avoiding the war. They had been watching, waiting for a sign that there was something worth fighting for, something more than just survival. They saw it in humanity. And they were willing to stand with them. One by one, more factions joined. Slowly, but steadily, humanity's influence began to grow. It was a long, grueling process, one that tested every bit of their resolve. There were setbacks, miscommunications, and betrayals along the way. But each victory, no matter how small, brought them closer to their ultimate goal. Then, the unexpected happened. The Deathworlders, in a rare moment of desperation, made a bold move. They attacked a neutral planet, one that had been harboring refugees from the conflict. The galaxy watched as the Deathworlders launched a full-scale assault, wiping out entire cities, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. It was a devastating blow, a message that they weren't just interested in winning the war, they wanted to crush any hope of resistance. But Lucas and his team knew that this was their chance. The galaxy had seen the Deathworlders for what they were, a force of destruction without mercy. Now was the time to unite, to turn the tide once and for all. Lucas stood in front of his team, his voice steady, his resolve clear. We've made progress. But this is the moment we've been waiting for. We show the galaxy that humanity's spirit can't be crushed. We stand for something more than survival. We stand for a future. Maya nodded. Let's do this. Together. Lucas stood at the heart of the War Council, surrounded by the most powerful figures in the galaxy. The final battle had been fought, not with weapons, but with words, strategy, and an unwavering belief in something greater than conquest. The Deathworlders, once humanity's greatest threat, now stood as uneasy allies, their respect for Lucas undeniable. The room was silent, awaiting his decision. Would he lead humanity into an era of dominance, leveraging his hard-won reputation to reshape the galactic order? Or would he step away, trusting that the lesson humanity had taught would be enough to change the course of history? Lucas took a deep breath. We've proven our strength, he said, his voice steady. Not through brute force, not through destruction, but through resilience, through strategy, through understanding. We don't need to rule this galaxy. We just need to be recognized as equals. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some had expected him to demand more, territory, power, influence. Others had expected him to back down entirely. Instead, he had done something none of them had anticipated. He had changed the very definition of victory. The Deathworlder warlord who had once mocked him now stepped forward. You fought us not with strength, but with will. That is a power we underestimated. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of the highest respect in his culture. One by one, the others followed. Lucas had not just won battles, he had shifted the perspective of an entire galaxy. Humanity was no longer the weakest species. They were something else entirely, something that no one had seen coming. As Lucas walked away from the council chamber, he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He had done what he set out to do, not for power, not for revenge, but to prove that even the smallest force, when determined enough, could shake the foundations of the universe. He looked out into the vastness of space, knowing that his story was now part of something greater. He had changed the galaxy, not by being the strongest, but by refusing to give up. And that would be humanity's legacy.